On a hot, humid afternoon on August 13, 1889, a road worker named Denny Coffee was tipped off by locals about a bad smell coming from a road near the Rhône River in Lyon, France. Going to check it out, Denny found a large oilskin bag hidden under a bush. Inside the bag, there was a man's naked, decaying body. The police didn't find anything at the scene that could help them figure out who the man was. Given that forensic science was still developing in the late 1800s, could it possibly help identify the unknown man? The forensic surgeon, Paul Bernard, who performed the autopsy, determined that the victim, aged between 35 and 45, had died from strangulation about 3 to 5 weeks prior. The man was bound with 7 meters of rope, and his head was covered in black oilcloth before being placed inside a trunk. This trunk, which was found emitting a strong decay odor, was discovered 2 days after the body in Saint-Laval. A shipping label from Paris on the trunk indicated that the victim might have been transported over 300 miles to where his body was eventually left. Could the deceased be Auguste Geoffroy, a well-to-do civil servant and widower from Marais, Paris, who mysteriously disappeared in late July? Geoffroy's worried brother-in-law alerted the police on July 27, but they took no immediate action. At that time, the Paris Exposition Universelle, a major world's fair, was captivating many, and it wasn't rare for people to be distracted by its splendor. Known for his romantic escapades, Geoffroy might have simply lost track of time. However, as days went by with no trace of him, the police began to suspect foul play. Then, a body linked to Paris surfaced near Lyon, intensifying the mystery. Upon receiving the news, François Gérin, the chief of Paris police, sent a description of Geoffroy to Paul Bernard, the forensic doctor. However, Bernard noted only a few similarities between the dead man and Geoffroy. They both had strong teeth and were missing the same upper right molar, but the body was shorter by an inch and had black hair, whereas Auguste Geoffroy's was chestnut brown. Also, at 49 years old, Geoffroy was older than the victim was estimated to be. To confirm, Geoffroy's brother-in-law traveled to Lyon to view the body, but he could not recognize the heavily decomposed remains as his late sister's husband. With no further leads, the authorities reluctantly buried the unidentified victim in a pauper's grave, hoping that future clues would surface. Weeks went by without any leads in the case until a crucial tip in the autumn rekindled the investigation. An anonymous informant claimed that Geoffroy was last seen at the Brasserie Gutenberg in the company of Michel Arnaud and his companion, Gabriel Beaumont, just before he disappeared. Michel, a 46-year-old known for his fraudulent schemes and shady dealings, had previously taken 21-year-old Gabrielle, a former sex worker, under his protection. The couple had resided in an apartment at 3 Rue de Rivoli in Paris and had left for America just 1 day after Geoffroy went missing. Additionally, a critical piece of evidence emerged when the shipping label on the trunk, where the body was found, was traced back to the Gare de Lyon railway station in Paris. It was confirmed that the trunk was sent to Lyon on July 27, the very day Geoffroy was reported missing. As the connections between the unidentified body and Geoffroy continued to surface, Chief Gérin insisted on exhuming the body for further examination. The local authorities in Lyon were skeptical, believing that after nearly 4 months, any attempt to identify the body would be futile. Nevertheless, Chief Gérin prevailed, and the body was dug up. A second autopsy was scheduled for November 13, 1889, conducted by Professor Alexandre Lacassagne, the head of the Department of Legal Medicine at the University of Lyon. Professor Lacassagne was a highly accomplished forensic doctor, known for developing innovative techniques that aided police in complex investigations. If anyone could link the remains to Geoffroy definitively, it was Professor Lacassagne. Professor Lacassagne faced a daunting task. The advanced state of decay presented a significant challenge, compounded by the damage caused during the first autopsy. Dr. Bernard had forcefully opened the victim's skull with a hammer to access the brain and shattered the sternum with a chisel, rendering it impossible to ascertain if there were any injuries in these areas. However, the pelvis, the final vertebrae of the coccyx, and the teeth remained intact. By examining these, along with the fusion of the bones and the shape of the tooth sockets, Lacassagne determined the victim's age to be between 45 and 50, older than initially estimated. For a more precise measurement of height, Lacassagne opted against the traditional method of stretching the body and adding 1.5 inches. Instead, he measured specific bones, femur, tibia, and fibula in the legs, humerus, radius, and ulna in the arms. These measurements led him to conclude that the victim stood at 5 feet 8 inches, the same height as Geoffroy. The discrepancy in hair color was also resolved. Initially, The cadaver's hair appeared black, a result of a coating caused by the decomposition process. Once washed, the hair revealed its true chestnut brown color, matching Jeffrey's. Further confirmation came when these cleaned hair strands were microscopically compared to samples from Jeffrey's hairbrushes, and they matched perfectly. Professor Lacassaigne's investigation extended beyond initial findings. He meticulously examined the victim's skeletal structure and discovered an old injury on the right heel and ankle bones. The discoloration and texture of the bones, grainy, coarse, and dented, indicated a previous injury that had not fully healed. This revelation was significant because when Chief Geron spoke to Jeffrey's family, the victim's father remembered that his son had broken his ankle as a toddler. Confident in the comprehensive evidence he had gathered, Professor Lacassaigne concluded in his report that the body found in Millery was indeed that of Monsieur Jeffrey. With the identity of the victim confirmed, the focus of the investigation shifted to tracing the origins of the trunk in which the body was transported. A replica of the trunk was displayed publicly, and it wasn't long before someone recognized it as the craftsmanship of a trunk maker based in London. The maker confirmed that the trunk had been purchased just weeks prior to the murder by a man named Michel Arnaud, deepening the mystery and guiding the next steps of the investigation. A widespread manhunt unfolded across North America as authorities tracked Michel and Gabrielle, who had fled through major cities including New York, Quebec, Vancouver, and San Francisco. Eventually, the couple split up. Gabrielle returned to France, where she was quickly arrested on January 22, 1890. 6 months later, Michel was caught in Havana, Cuba, after being recognized by a fellow Frenchman. With both suspects in custody, the full extent of their heinous plan began to come to light. The investigation revealed that Michel and Gabrielle had exploited Jeffrey's known tendencies as a womanizer to execute their grim scheme. On July 26, Gabrielle visited the Brasserie Gutenberg, a place where Jeffrey was known to frequent on Friday nights. She engaged him in flirtation and persuaded him to accompany her to her apartment. Believing he was fortunate, Jeffrey followed without hesitation. At her apartment, thinking it was all playful, he didn't object when Gabrielle wrapped the belt of her dressing gown around his neck. At this moment, Michel, who had been hidden behind the curtains, seized the belt, attached it to a rope and pulley system mounted to the ceiling, and attempted to hang Jeffrey. When this method failed to kill him, Michel resorted to strangling Jeffrey manually. Tragically, they discovered that Jeffrey had not brought any money with him. He had left his earnings from that week in his office. This brutal act of violence was rendered even more senseless by its fruitlessness, marking a dark conclusion to their calculated plot. After murdering Jeffrey, Michel and Gabrielle placed his body in a trunk and shipped it to Lyon, where they abandoned it along the road to Millery before fleeing the country. The crime led to a sensational trial known as the Jeffrey Affair in December 1890. During the trial, Gabrielle's defense argued that she was an involuntary accomplice, claiming that Michel had hypnotized her into participating in the murder. While such a defense might not be effective today, it influenced her sentencing at the time. Gabrielle Beaumont received a 20-year prison term. Conversely, Michel Arnaud was sentenced to death and was executed by guillotine on February 3, 1891, at Place de la Roquette. The resolution of the Jeffrey Affair owed much to the groundbreaking forensic work of Professor Alexandre Lacassaigne. His meticulous analysis and innovative methods were hailed as a masterpiece in criminology, setting new standards in the field. Lacassaigne's techniques not only identified the victim but also provided critical evidence that linked the suspects to the crime. His contributions to forensic science continue to be revered, earning him recognition as a pioneer and often referred to as the father of scientific criminal investigation.